We have some idea of what is consciousness. All of us are briefed or well versed with what is consciousness to some extent. Whereas when we come to free will, many of us do not even know what free will is. And in fact, I did a sampling. I asked a few doctor people as well as non-doctors also. They were just saying, I am not that conversant with that. Can you please tell me what is free will? And once we say what is free will, then of course they come up with their views. So free will is a much more difficult subject, and I'm sure the debate is going to be interesting. It's as we found with consciousness and the brain, any debate, ultimately we won't have a obviously, we won't have a solution, we won't come to a conclusion. That is why it is a debate. And the same applies for free will also. But that is not the point whether we are able to conclude or not. It is what we get out, what material we get, the research which is being done by the speakers, and the material we get out of it and enrich ourselves. That is what matters, as we found in the previous two talks also. So I have Madam Dr. Pritika Chari, all of you know very well. She's a neurologist and a neurosurgeon and an epileptologist, and she is going to talk to us about the neurology of free will. And this will be followed by a talk by Mr. Krishnamurthy, who will talk on philosophy and free will. Obviously, both are involved. Now we need to find out, as Yogaraj said when he was about to begin the talk, whether it was all integrated. Yes, it was integrated. And so this, this is also likely to be integrated. So let's hear.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here in this meeting. It was very exciting listening to the first half of the session, and I hope that the second half is equally exciting. I'd like to first start my presentation with, I'm actually directly quoting Antonio Damasio, who, as you know, has written a lot on consciousness. And though we have had a discussion already on consciousness, I just want to say a little bit more about that. He says in his TED Talk, I'm here to talk about the wonder and the mystery of conscious minds. The wonder is about the fact that we all woke up this morning and we had with it the amazing return. We recovered minds with a complete sense of self and a complete sense of our own existence. Yet we hardly ever pause to consider this wonder. We should, in fact, because without having this possibility of conscious minds, we would have no knowledge whatsoever about our humanity. We would have no knowledge whatsoever about the world. We would have no pains, but also no joys. We would have no access to love or to the ability to create. Without consciousness, we would have no access to true happiness and even the possibility of transcendence. So he asks us a very simple question, as what is consciousness? And he says, in a very simple definition, it is that which we lose when we fall into deep sleep without dreams or when we go under anesthesia, and what we get back when we recover from sleep or anesthesia. So he says, he defines consciousness as it having different components. And one of the components is mind, which is a flow of mental images according to him. And he says that our 5 senses or 6 senses or however many inputs that we have, sensory inputs that we have, create a series of mental images in the brain in various parts of the sensory cortices of the brain. And these images also, they form like, it's like a grid. And this impression about the cytoskeleton and the microtubules actually is highlighted in a way in a very simplistic manner. So there's a grid of neurons. A picture is formed there, or if it's a visual impression, or a sound is formed there. It is formed in a particular pattern. It's formed in a map. And this map is something which is a pattern. It is there as an entire pattern. And it has digital elements to it. And this map can be recalled at any time. Now, these maps, what happens to them is, they get stored in the association cortices. And there you call that as a sort of a memory center. So the map is initially formed in the sensory cortices, and then these image-making regions get plotted as memory in the visual association, auditory association, tactile association areas, etc. And from these areas, we can pull it out whenever we are going to use image making to recall information. So this is a very simplistic, very basic kind of way of looking at what actually happens when we get aware of certain things that happen around us. And association cortices are in the front, middle, and back, and they cater to different aspects of our sensory inputs. Now, the next stage that, according to Damasio, is that we need to have what is known as a mind-body coupling. Now, as far as the mind is concerned, you have the image making, you have the memory preservation, and that has to couple together with the brainstem and communicate with the rest of the body. And if the red area is affected, we all know that we become unconscious. And if the green area is affected, we also know that we may be paralyzed, but we may remain conscious. So this is a very important area which is needed for us to be aware of what is happening to us. So we need this three-way connection, as it were, from the cortex to the brainstem, and in the cortex between the primary sensory areas and the association areas and the body itself. So nobody really knows what consciousness is. There's a lot of confusion in the literature, and we are yet to isolate an area in the brain that is responsible for consciousness. There may be none. So we have intuitively assumed that many of the acts of volition that we do are not influenced by unconscious information. And this can be the commonest thing that was studied is spontaneous motor action. Whether there is some kind of preamble to us, we know about the pre-verbatim. Macdonald Critchley mentioned the pre-verbatim when it came to language long, long ago. And he said that when we are about to say something, it's already completely formed in our brains, and then only it comes out as a sentence or a word in our mouth. The available evidence suggests that unconscious information can influence our conscious choices or our conscious activities. So the neuroscience of free will is neurophilosophy that studies the interconnections between free will and neuroscience. So while neurology of free will has been given as a separate topic and philosophy as a separate topic, actually there is a blend between the two, and it's a neurophilosophy. And because we are now with imaging modalities being so advanced, we are able to study the living brain. There are certain things that we are able to become aware of. Benjamin Libet was one of the pioneers who started the initial studies, and subsequent studies have all redesigned what he originally did. What he did was he studied the brain's activity when it is related to a decision to move versus when we actually move an arm or a leg or whatever, like moving a finger, for instance. And he mentioned that there is this desire to move is initiated unconsciously at first and enters consciousness afterwards. And he suggests that our conscious self does not initiate all behavior. That there are a lot of behaviors which are already patterned, designed, and embedded in our unconsciousness, which only come to the surface when we call it by a matter of what is free choice and not free will. So, there is, however, the brain plays a very important role in moderating this choice. And so, there is a suggestion also that unconscious behavior may play a bigger role even in cognitive functions, not just in motor functions, than we previously thought. And one of the important functions that consciousness seems to play is to cancel the undesirable behavior which may be there in the unconscious. Now, for instance, if a motor act is something that can endanger us, the consciousness tells us, look, that act is dangerous, and it cancels it out. So this was an important aspect which the consciousness serves against the unconscious patterns. So there are certain decisions that we commit to, and then we become aware of them. So there is also Jackson Freeman, he talked about the power of even unconscious systems and actions which can change the world according to our intentions. So another aspect comes into play here. Your intent to do something. It is actually the unconscious patterning is there, but there is an intent. Whether this intent is an unconscious intent or a conscious intent is still a moot question. But when you have intention, independent of awareness, you can initiate an action. That is what Walter Jackson Freeman advocates. So, in effect, if you look at it, the illusion of free choice is probably something like this. Whether you go through that entrance or this entrance, you end up in the slaughterhouse. So, we're still a bit confused as to whether we really have free choice. And life is like a game of bridge. The hand you are dealt with represents determinism. And the way you play it is free will. So what is this determinism? It is the philosophical position that every event, including human action, there exist conditions that could cause no other event. What it means is it's sort of a preset, kind of regulated information which is not changeable. For instance, if you look at it, we can have biological determinism, which is genetic determinism. You can have psychic determinism. You can have environmental determinism. So these are all sort of fixed factors which are not so easily modifiable and which influence our behavior. And they can influence us in various aspects. And under free will, we look at our positive psychology, our cognitive behavior, our humanism, our existence, the fact that we exist, that we are aware that we exist. Who am I? Is also all part of so-called free will. And how did I become who I am? There is a nature and nurture aspect to it. The biology and genetic makeup is the determinism which tells us it can regulate our human behavior depending upon what we inherited from our parents. And there is the nurture aspect, which is the social determinism. Culture and social environment mold our behavior as we develop. So, if you look at, there are other aspects also where there are different viewpoints besides determinism which are expressed. But if you look at it, hard determinism says there is no free will. They say that everything is predestined, predetermined. It is what you're born with, what you're nurtured with, and there's no chance for free will. But the other aspects, some of the other ways of thinking suggest that you could have free will. But if you look at our discussion, we are neither fixed in any of these compartments. We are still keeping it open because we are not quite sure about whether we can exercise our free will or is it just a free choice. See, in effect, we are just a bag of chemicals. Biology and biochemistry is what makes us do what we do. And we have no problem when relating with that to various biological systems, including plants. But when it comes to humans, we somehow find it a little difficult to accept that this bag of chemicals is determining a lot of what we are doing. We just had a discussion on how the bag of chemicals inside our pineal glands can actually take us to a different state. But we sometimes want to counter that and say that the chemical reactions can only produce a kind of a physical response or something that we can see rather than something that we can experience. So there seems to be a kind of internal free will that we have, and there seems to be a volitional motor movement. If you take volitional motor movement, there seems to be a sense of control. But is this free will or is it free choice is something which is constantly discussed. When a motor act is done, it's a fairly simple process. We all know how it works. We know that in lab animals, they show that when a decision is made upon a course of action, the signals are seen in two important areas. One source is in the premotor cortex. Signals here initiate the movement in response to a specific external trigger such as a visual cue. So there is a hot not object. As soon as you touch, the withdrawal is something that is reflex. But if you seek to go and touch, it's a volitional motor act. And if there's a visual cue which makes you want to pick up a flower or pick up an object, that is a visual cue which is making you create the movement. Then it has also been seen that there is a lag between the preparation and the decision and movement. It is about 3 to 4 seconds earlier. The preparation seems to happen unconsciously 3 to 4 seconds earlier than the actual decision and the actual movement. This was done using volunteers who had to press a buzzer. And if you look in this, you'll find that the prediction of decision was picked up earlier than the actual button press. So it seems to suggest that in the pre-supplementary motor area, there is a readiness. There is a kind of preparation which happens and says, now I'm ready, and then the decision is taken to execute the motor act. And when lab animals are stimulated in the pre-supplementary motor area, you'll find that there are no external sources needed. It's a readiness which happens without external visual cues or any other cues happening. So the readiness potential is in a different area, probably in an association area. And then the actual motor area picks up the impulse. But there are some confounding aspects. When you tell a person, do this, do that, you're actually bringing in, are you bringing in a choice or a free will element to it? So what people said was these experiments are not very reliable and they may not be the ideal answer. So we go back to Wilder Penfield, and where he did a lot of stimulation experiments, and they started doing electrical stimulation of various parts and seeing what happens. And long ago we knew that when portions of the pre-supplemental motor area were stimulated, the person would experience a conscious urge to move. And in the inferior posterior parietal cortex, when it was stimulated, there was an experience of an urge to move specific body parts. So you could actually map, and where the stimulating one area could cause movement of the arm, movement of the chest, movement of the leg, etc. So this is as far as the posterior parietal cortex is concerned. It was an urge to move a specific body part. It was not actually moving a body part. But what happens is, in the pre-supplementary area, when you give the stimulation, at a low current, the urge to act is acquired. But when you give a high current, an actual movement occurs. Now you may say this is not actually the motor area. You're not stimulating the motor area per se, but then you're able to produce with a high current an actual movement. So there is a lot of discussion which suggests that this preparedness or this readiness which we are talking about is almost a complete motor act by itself in the pre-supplementary motor area, and which is different, which is completely different from the motor area. So that's what these experiments showed, suggesting that our intention to do a particular motor act is probably more widespread in the brain than we believe. Whereas in the parietal cortex, the urge was stimulated at low intensities, and even at higher intensities, you never produced a movement from the parietal cortex. So the pre-supplementary motor cortex assists the motor cortex, and the parietal cortex is purely a different area which has nothing to do with preparedness for a motor act, though it has the urge to move a particular body part. And the desire to move did not result from subtle motor contractions that may have been generated by motor regions. So that also, if you suspected that there were subtle motor actions happening because of the parietal cortex stimulation, that did not happen. And it never produced muscle activity regardless of the intensity. But the stimulation of the premotor cortex itself produced large limb movements in subjects, but never the desire to move the limbs. So the preparedness was there, but the urge was not there. So the stimulation studies suggest that there are two aspects of conscious intention. One might be the conscious correlation of a preparatory motor command in the pre-supplemental cortex region. There is a consciousness that urged, you are aware that you want to move the limb. The other might involve a sensory prediction of the consequences of these commands under the domain of the association cortex region. So, when we think about a motor act or a cognitive act or any other act that we do, is there a free will? It's God in His wisdom gave us what we think is free will, but we're not quite sure whether it is really there or whether He has already put all the patterns in our brains. And sometimes our understanding is at such a low level that we need to get more structure into our knowledge about whether we have free will or not. But has free will destroyed us? We don't know. Are our choices destroying us? We can make choices, or are we working from a predetermined unconscious urge to do something? We are not sure. So are our brains deterministic, and will we be able to one day predict every single decision and thought that a human makes? I don't know. But do we have free will really? I don't know. But I'd much rather like to stay in this kind of a neutral state where I have a little bit of free will, at least so I think. When I'm awake, I'm mindful of the thoughts that I have, which are not self. When I have free will, I'm in control of my thoughts. It is me, it is mine, this is myself. And there is some degree of determinism. This is all my karma or God's wish or whatever. I feel that right now we are in a stage of a balance of these three states. And we could allow any of these states to rule over the other states in striking a balance. But I sincerely believe man is a masterpiece of creation. And I don't think any amount of determinism can prevent us from believing that we can act as free beings. So I believe that there is a certain amount of free will or free choice, you could call it either. There is a basic amount of determinism, but at the end of the day, it's thrown open to you to decide. I favor some degree of free will over some basic determinism. Thank you.
Into the topic itself, now you've really laid the basis of the debate, and probably you also said that there is an element of both, which obviously that you believe there is both. And so let's hear from Sir, Mr. Krishnamurthy, as to being related to free will. Mr. Krishnamurthy, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. And from a non-medical and from a non-neuro, maybe I'm the only presenter. And also, Madam did not put it as a debate. And she partially finished with the openness of free will being from a philosophical and a neurological standpoint. And my association with Dr. Vasudevan sir has been over the last 12 years. And there has been quite a bit of philosophy which has went inside me. Even though I have gone to him for treatment, it has never been on the medical standpoint. So being a software professional, why I'm here is, having listened to him so many times, how things could be treated from a philosophy